My name is Marion Whitfield, and the day I drove away from my son's house for the last time, I had $1,100 in my checking account, a U-Haul I'd rented under my own name, and the deed to a lake cottage nobody knew I'd bought. This is the story of how I got there and why I'd do it again. Let me start with the thing that broke me, because I think you'll understand it better than most. It was a Tuesday in late September. I was carrying a laundry basket down the hall toward the garage, the way I did most mornings, when I heard my daughter-in-law on the phone in the kitchen. She didn't hear me. The dryer was running, and I moved quiet now, quieter than I used to, on account of the hip. She was laughing about something, that bright social laugh she used for people she wanted to impress, and then she said it. No, no, she lives with us now. It's fine. I mean, it's a lot. Her bathroom alone. Dawn, I have to keep a candle going in the hall. I swear it smells like a waiting room down there. Old people smell. You know the one. I stopped right there by the linen closet. I just stood there holding that basket of towels. Old people smell, like a waiting room. I want to tell you something. I worked 31 years as a dental hygienist in Cedar Rapids. I was the cleanest person you ever met. I scrubbed my hands raw for 3 decades. I showered every single morning of my life. And I stood in that hallway at 73 years old, wondering if I had become something that needed a candle to cover up. I backed away before she could see me. I went into my room. They called it the guest room, though I'd lived in it 18 months by then. And I sat down on the edge of the bed and I didn't cry. That surprised me, that I didn't cry. I think some part of me had been waiting a long time to hear out loud what I already knew. So let me back up and tell you how a woman who owned her own home for 40 years ended up in a guest room being something somebody apologized for. My husband passed 4 years ago. Harold, 46 years married. He had a stroke in the garden of all places, fell right into the tomatoes he was so proud of, and he was gone before the ambulance turned onto our street. After that, the house got too big and too quiet, and when my son sat me down and said, "Mom, why are you rattling around in that place all alone? Come live with us. You'd be closer to the grandkids." It sounded like grace. It sounded like somebody loved me. My son's name is Brendan. He's an attorney. Does corporate work. Contracts, the kind of thing he could never quite explain at dinner without my eyes glazing over. His wife is named Sloan. She does interior staging for real estate, which means she walks through houses deciding what's wrong with them. And I think after a while, a person who does that for a living starts to look at everything that way, including, eventually, me. I sold my house in Cedar Rapids. Got a fair price, $290,000, and I put a big chunk of it, $80,000, toward their down payment on the new place in the suburbs of Des Moines. A beautiful house, I'll give them that. 5 bedrooms, a kitchen island the size of a rowboat. Brendan handled all the paperwork. He said it was simpler that way. Just put it in our names, Mom. You don't want to deal with property taxes at your age. And I let him, because he was my son, and I trusted him the way you trust your own hand. The first few months were lovely. I want to be honest about that. I made breakfast. I drove the kids to school. Mason's 9, Hazel's 12. I planted herbs in the kitchen window, basil and thyme and a little pot of chives. I paid the cable bill without anyone asking. I felt useful, and useful felt like belonging. But somewhere in there it turned. I couldn't tell you the exact day. It's like watching the sun go down. You never catch the moment it actually sets. You just look up and it's dark. First it was the herbs. Sloan was hosting a thing for her work, some open house people, and she asked me, sweetly, she always said things sweetly, if I'd mind moving my little plants off the window. They cluttered the sightline. I moved them to the garage. They died by Thanksgiving. Not enough light out there. Then it was my chair. I'd brought one thing from the old house. Harold's reading chair. This worn green wingback that still smelled faintly like him if you pressed your face into it, which I did sometimes when no one was home. It sat in the corner of the family room for a while. Then one day I came back from the grocery store and it was gone. "We moved it to your room, Mom," Brendan said. It really crowded the space down here. It didn't crowd anything, there was a whole empty corner. But I said thank you because that's what I'd started doing, saying thank you for things that hurt. I became a kind of furniture myself, a useful piece. I folded the laundry, I matched the socks, I made the casseroles. I learned the children's schedules better than their own parents did, and in exchange, I learned to take up less and less room. I stopped humming in the kitchen. I used to hum my whole life. Harold said I had a voice like a radio left on low. I stopped leaving my reading glasses on the counter. I stopped, God help me, I stopped putting my own coffee mug in the dishwasher because Sloan rewashed everything I touched anyway, and after a while, you just get tired of watching somebody scrub the place where your lips were. My grandkids drifted too. Hazel used to climb in my lap. Now she said, "Hey, Grandma," without looking up from her phone. Last spring, I overheard her tell a friend she couldn't have a sleepover because my grandma lives here. It's weird. It wasn't weird when I sat up all night with her during the flu. It wasn't weird when I paid for her braces. $1,100 I gave them, the same amount, funny enough, that I'd have left in my account at the end of all this. But children learn what they're shown. And what they were shown was a mother who stepped around her own mother like a wet spot on the floor. And then the candle. After I heard that phone call, I noticed it. A candle on the little table outside my door. Cream colored, expensive looking, one of those minimalist labels. Fresh cotton, it said. But it smelled like bleach with a perfume on top, and now I knew exactly what it was for. I started showering twice a day. I washed my nightgowns separately by hand, hung them over the tub so the smell wouldn't get on the family's wash. I scrubbed until my skin went pink. 73 years old, and I was apologizing to a hallway for the crime of existing in it. The night that changed things, I couldn't sleep, and I went down to the kitchen for some more milk. My grandson, Mason, was at the counter eating cereal at midnight, which he was not supposed to do, and he looked up at me with milk on his chin and said, real quiet, "Grandma, are you really going somewhere?" I said, "What do you mean, baby?" He said, "I heard Mom and Dad talking. They said there's a place, a home, for when you can't anymore." And then he got scared he'd said too much, and he just looked down at his cereal. I stood very still. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, a toilet ran. "I won't go anywhere you can't visit," I told him. And I rubbed his head and I sent him up to bed. And then I sat down at that big rowboat island in the dark, and I felt something turn over in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like a key in a lock that's been rusted shut so long you forgot it was a door. The next morning, Brendan came down with that lawyer face he wears, and he said, "Mom, Sloan and I want to talk to you sometime soon about the future. Planning, you know. There are some really nice communities now. They're not like the old days." He patted my hand. "We just want what's best for you." And I said, "Of course, honey," because I'd already decided something. I just hadn't told my face yet. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 18 months. I left the house with nobody knowing where I was going. I called a cab. I'd let my own car insurance lapse because Brendan said it was silly to pay it when I barely drove anymore. Another quiet little theft I'd nodded along with. And I went to see a lawyer of my own, not Brendan's. A woman named Theodora Pruitt came recommended from the senior center I'd started sneaking off to for the free coffee and the company. She was about my age, sharp as a tack, reading glasses on a beaded chain. I told her everything, the house, the down payment, the candle, all of it. I expected her to be gentle with me, the way everyone was gentle with me now, like I was something that might crack. Instead, she got a hard, focused look and she said, "Marion, did your son ever transfer the title to that house into both your names or just theirs?" I told her the truth. I didn't know. I'd signed where he pointed. She had me pull my bank records and a few old documents I kept in a shoebox. Harold always said, "Keep everything." And thank God I listened. And it took her 3 weeks of digging, 2 more appointments I made up physical therapy excuses to attend, but what she found, I'll remember the rest of my life. Your $80,000, she said, tapping a folder, was a contribution to the purchase. There's no gift letter on file. No documentation that you signed away any interest. Under Iowa law, you have a strong, equitable claim. That's money you put in with the clear understanding you'd have a home. And there's something else. She slid a paper across the desk. The retirement account, the IRA your husband left you. Did you know your son was named as a financial power of attorney on it 2 years ago? You signed something. Do you remember signing something? I did remember. It was right after the move. Brendan had brought a stack of papers to the kitchen for the household, and I'd signed without my glasses on because I couldn't find them and I didn't want to make a fuss. She let that sit a second. Then she said, Marion, I think they've been planning your finances for a while. The good news is, you caught it, and almost nothing has been touched yet. You still have time. You still have choices. Choices. I rolled that word around in my mouth on the cab ride home like a butterscotch. That night I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the closet and took out the dress. I should explain the dress. When I retired, I bought myself a navy blue dress, real silk, with little covered buttons up the front. $89, which to me was an extravagance close to sin. I'd imagined wearing it to lunches with girlfriends, to concerts in the park. I never wore it once. The girlfriends scattered or passed on. The concerts never happened. It just hung there in a garment bag, in the dark, behind the winter coats, waiting for a life I kept not living. I put it on. It fit a little different now. I'm narrower in the shoulders than I was. The years take you down a size whether you want them to or not. But I stood in front of the mirror on the back of the door, and I looked at myself for the first time in I don't know how long. Gray hair I kept short for ease. Lines I'd earned. Hands spotted but steady. And under all that, somewhere, Marion. The woman who put 2 kids through community college on a hygienist's salary after Harold's first layoff. The woman who held strangers' jaws steady and their fears steady and never once dropped either. I sat down on the bed in that silk dress and I got out a little notebook and I made a list. Not a sad list. A plan. What I had. What was mine. What no one could take if I didn't hand it over. The next morning, Sloan breezed into the kitchen, late as always, and said, Marion, can you grab the dry cleaning today and get Hazel from practice at 4? I poured my coffee. I took a sip, and I said, no, I have plans today. She stopped with one earring half in. You have what plans? Plans, I said. I'm sure you'll figure something out. You always do. She stared at me like the toaster had spoken. Then her phone buzzed and she had to go and she went, and I sat there and finished my coffee slow. And I'll tell you, that first no tasted better than the coffee did. Now here's where I have to tell you what I did. And I want you to understand it wasn't revenge. People hear this story and they want it to be revenge. It wasn't. It was a woman taking back what was already hers. Over the next 2 months, I worked with Theodora. We didn't sue anybody. We didn't have to. The leverage was the 80,000 and the power of attorney they'd never expected me to find. But I didn't want to drag my son through a courtroom and burn down every bridge with the grandkids I loved. I wanted out with my dignity and my money. That's all. So we made a quiet agreement, drawn up proper. They would refinance and buy out my $80,000 interest in the house. Brendan, of all people, understood instantly. The second a lawyer who wasn't him explained the numbers. And I revoked that power of attorney so fast, Theodora said she'd never seen a form filled out with such enthusiasm. And with my own money, I'd half forgotten I still had real control over. I'd already done the thing I was proudest of. I bought a cottage, a little 2-bedroom on Lake Panorama, an hour west, with a screened porch and a dock that needed work and a kitchen window that got the morning sun. 1,100 square feet. Smaller than the guest room closet in Sloane's house felt sometimes. It was the most beautiful thing I ever owned. I'd visited it 3 times under the cover of physical therapy, walked every room, stood on that little dock, and watched the light come up off the water and felt my whole chest open like a window in spring. I timed the move for a weekend they went to Sloane's parents' lake place in Minnesota. Funny, them having a lake place I was never once invited to, while I quietly bought my own. They left Friday morning, the van piled with kids and coolers, Sloane yelling for someone to grab the sunscreen. The door slammed. The house went silent. I gave it 20 minutes. Then I made a phone call, and by 10 that morning, a man named Walt from the senior center, a retired plumber with forearms like ham hocks and the kindest eyes, pulled up in a U-Haul with his friend Roselle. Theodora came too, just to be there. We didn't take much. I didn't want their things, and most of what I'd had was long gone. I took Harold's green chair. I took the navy dress. I took my mother's quilt and a shoebox of letters and the photo of Hazel and Mason when they were little and still climbed in my lap. I took my own coffee mug, the one I'd stopped putting in the dishwasher. 12 boxes, 2 trips up the stairs for Walt, who wouldn't let me lift a thing. Before I left, I stood in that guest room one last time, empty now except for the candle out in the hall, which I had never once lit. I thought about leaving a long letter. I'd written one, 3 pages, full of all the hurt. But standing there, I realized I didn't need them to read 3 pages of my pain. So I tore it up, and I wrote something shorter, and I left it on the kitchen island where Sloane couldn't miss it, because Sloane hated a mess, and a folded note on her clean granite would drive her up a wall. It said, "My 80,000 will be repaid through Theodora Pruitt. She has the paperwork. The power of attorney is revoked. I've gone somewhere I'm welcome. Please don't call until you can talk to me like I'm a person and not a problem. I love you. Mom." I didn't leave an address. Theodora had it, and she'd give it out when, and if, my son was ready to come to me like a son and not like a lawyer. Then I walked out the front door in my navy silk dress, and I did not look back, not even once. And Walt opened the passenger door of that U-Haul and called me ma'am in a way that made me feel like the Queen of England, and we drove west into the morning. They came back Sunday night to that note on the island. My phone lit up like a slot machine. Brendan, then Sloane, then numbers I didn't know. The voicemails went from confused to angry to that careful lawyer calm Brendan uses when he's lost control of a deal. "Mom, this is insane. Mom, call me. We can fix this. Mom, you can't just disappear. Do you understand what you've put us through?" I listened to every one of them out on my new dock, with a cup of tea going cold in my hand and the loons calling out on the water. And I felt, I want to be careful how I say this, I felt sorry. Not sorry I left. Sorry it had to come to this. There's a difference, and it took me 73 years to learn it. It was Hazel who broke through first. A text, 2 weeks later, from a number I didn't recognize because she'd gotten a new phone. "Grandma, is this you? Mom doesn't know I'm texting. Are you okay? Where did you go?" I sat on that dock and I cried for the first time in the whole ordeal. Then I wrote back, "I'm fine, sweet girl. Better than I've been in years. I have a lake. There are ducks. Come see me when your mom says it's okay." She wrote back one word, "Promise? Promise." Mason came first, actually. Brendan drove him out one Saturday in October, dropped him at the end of the gravel drive, and sat in the car in the road for 2 hours like he couldn't decide whether he was allowed to come closer. Mason and I made grilled cheese and threw bread to the ducks off the dock, and he asked me 11 questions about whether you could swim in a lake in winter, and I answered every one. When Brendan finally got out of the car to collect him, he stood at the edge of my porch like a man at the edge of a cliff, and he looked at the cottage, really looked at it, the chair, the quilt, the herbs already going in the window box, and something moved across his face that I'd been waiting 4 years to see. He saw me. For the first time since Harold died, my son actually saw his mother. He didn't apologize that day. That came later. around Thanksgiving when he showed up alone with a pie from the bakery I like, and sat at my little kitchen table and put his head down on his arms like he was 9 years old again and said, "I stopped seeing you, Mom. I got so busy managing everything, I forgot you were a person to be loved instead of a thing to be handled, and I'm so sorry." I let him say it. I'd waited a long time to hear it, and I wasn't going to rush it. We're not what we were. That bridge is gone, and we both know it. But we're building something new, and it's honest, which the old thing never was. Sloan and I keep a careful distance, polite and real, which is more than we ever had. The kids come most weekends now. Hazel's learning to knit. Mason's named all 6 ducks. And me, I joined the Lake Association board. I host a Tuesday coffee in my screened porch, and 7 women show up, and nobody once apologizes for the smell of anybody. I planted tomatoes in honor of Harold, and they came in sweet, sweeter than anything I grew in that big, beautiful house where I wasn't allowed to take up room. I wear the navy dress to the supper club on Fridays. A widower named Gus saved me a seat last week, and I let him. Sometimes I sit on my dock at dusk with the loons going, and I think about that candle in the hallway. Fresh cotton. I never did light it. I left it sitting on that little table for them to find, still wrapped, still cold. The way you'd leave behind a thing that was never about the smell at all. Because here's what nobody tells you about getting old in somebody else's house. They don't put a candle out because you stink. They put it out because they've already decided you're something to be covered up. And the day you understand that, really understand it all the way down, is the day you find out whether you've got one good move left in you. I had one. I made it. And I have never once, not for a single morning on this lake, been sorry. If you've ever been made to feel like a burden in a home you helped build, I'd love to hear your story. Where are you watching from tonight? Leave it in the comments. I read everyone. And take care of the old folks in your life while you still have them. We can hear you even through the dryer. I think about that candle a lot, the one outside my door that I never lit. For the longest time, I believed the problem was me, that I had become something that needed covering up. But the truth is simpler and harder than that. The candle wasn't about a smell. It was about a decision Sloan and Brendan had already made. That I was a thing to be managed instead of a mother to be loved. And once I saw that clearly, everything that followed made a kind of plain sense. What happened to me didn't happen by accident, and it didn't get fixed by accident either. I lost my place in that house one small surrender at a time. The herbs I moved, the chair I let them carry off, the no I never said, the papers I signed without my glasses. Every yes that cost me something was a brick I handed over. So when I finally took my life back, I had to do it the same slow, deliberate way I lost it. One honest choice at a time. If there's anything I'd want my granddaughter Hazel to carry from all this, it's 3 plain things. The first is to do right by people, but never confuse being kind with being a doormat. I spent years saying thank you for things that hurt me, and I called it grace. It wasn't grace. It was fear, wearing Grace's coat. Real decency includes the people you see in the mirror. The second is to keep your wits about you, especially about money and the papers people slide across your kitchen table. I almost lost an IRA my husband worked 40 years to leave me, all because I didn't want to make a fuss and find my reading glasses. The day I sat down with Theodora and actually understood my own situation was the day I stopped being a victim of it. Knowing where you stand isn't cold. It's how you protect the people you love, including yourself. And the third is the one that took me 73 years and a lake to learn, that you have to be willing to do the hard thing when the easy thing is killing you slow. Renting that U-Haul, signing that deed, leaving that note on the granite, driving west in a silk dress I'd been too afraid to wear for 5 years, none of it was easy. It would have been so much easier to stay small and quiet and apologetic until they shipped me off to some pastel place to wait. Courage isn't a feeling. It's a thing you do with your hands shaking. I didn't get my dignity back because I was owed it. I got it back because I finally stood up, used my head, and refused to keep handing myself away. The loons are calling out on the water as I write this, and the tomatoes are coming in sweet. And I am at long last exactly where I belong, not because anyone gave me room, but because I finally took it.